I'm going to watch the Stanford women's basketball game. I'm Karen Dorn-Steele, today's lay leader. I welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. Whether you're in the sanctuary or participating from afar, it is here that we join to create a nourishing and religious home with a mission to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in the wider world, or as we say more briefly, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. I have one announcement this morning. We are going to have a new membership orientation that will occur both in person and on Zoom after the second service on December 11th. And if you would like more information about it, there will be someone in the back of the sanctuary after the service to give you information. Now, please take a few moments to greet one another and say hello to any newcomers among us. We now turn from our informal greetings to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and our individuality. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. As the darkness of winter settles in and we approach the solstice, we will be reflecting this Sunday on a subject that touches all of us in some way. It is another form of darkness, mental illness. Its toll ripples through our society. Here are a few of the troubling numbers. 1 in 5 adults experiences some form of mental illness each year. Half of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14, and 3/4 by age 24. It's linked to school failure, substance abuse, cardiovascular and other health problems, family burdens, and job loss. Mental illness is also implicated in 1 out of every 8 emergency room visits. Anxiety and depression among teenagers have increased 59% in the last 15 years, with the rate for girls outpacing boys. The recent pandemic accelerated this trend. Federal funding has not kept up with the treatment needs. Spokane County and the rural communities surrounding us in eastern Washington do not fare well in these statistics. Sadly, our mental health metrics are worse than Washington State as a whole. We're honored today to have 2 speakers from the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI for short, who are on the front lines of this epidemic and have personal stories to share. Chauntelle Lieske, who previously worked with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, has been the executive director of Spokane's NAMI chapter for the past year and a half. She lost her mother to suicide in 2014 and was called to help others suffering from mental illness. Scott Bowmer has been a NAMI member for 6 years. A former naval and merchant marine officer and also a high-tech manufacturer, he was diagnosed later in life with bipolar illness and took disability leave. He's now a trained facilitator for the NAMI Connections program in Spokane and an instructor for NAMI's peer education program. Let's welcome Chauntelle and Scott to our church.
Our first in-service hymn of the morning is number 1008. If you're in the back and find it hard to see the screen, you can search for a small turquoise book under the chairs ahead of you. It's called When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. Please rise as you're willing and able to sing it.
When our heart is in a holy place, when we draw
Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our hearts and minds and whom we want to wrap in our love and care. We light a candle this morning for Mary Lou Lewis, her son Kyle, and her granddaughter Madison. Madison will be going through stem cell treatment in December in Seattle. We also remember the suffering of Ukraine under a Russian invasion that has deliberately targeted civilians, and the recent missile incident in Poland as the war spilled over their border. We also mourn the 4 University of Idaho students who were murdered last week and all other innocent victims of violence. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts. You are welcome to say their names, those named aloud and those remembered in the silence we hold in our community of compassion. Today we have a special collection. You'll find a small envelope in your order of service. Don't worry about sealing it as we reuse the envelopes. This month's special collection is for NAMI, a small Spokane nonprofit that relies heavily on local donations and puts the money to work to support people with mental illness. NAMI helps adults and also organizes education outreach programs to young people to help reduce the stigma surrounding mental illness. This group works to send a powerful message: you are not alone. If NAMI's mission moves you, you may use today's envelopes for a donation. You can also contribute online or write a check to the church with November special collection in the memo line. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Maura. At this point, I'd love to invite all of the children up for our time for all ages. We've got a special guest who we haven't seen in a few weeks. Some of you might be meeting him for the very first time, but this is Bun Bun. Hello, Bun Bun. It's so good to see you. Gosh, I wish you were here last week. There were so many puppets at church. You might have liked being on stage with them. Yes, I know. He said it might have made him feel kind of nervous, but Todd would not have made a dummy out of you. He made me one. Do you remember that? Some of you who were here. But he asked my permission first. Well, my family is celebrating Thanksgiving this week with a big dinner. Any of you? Yes, just one of you is doing Thanksgiving dinner? 2, 3 of you? Oh, good. Lots of you. Perfect. Well, how about you, Bun Bun? Well, that should be fun. Tell me, what will your bunny family be eating? Roasted carrots, mashed carrots, carrot casserole, carrot pie. Wow, so many ways to prepare carrots, Bun Bun. Oh, also, olive and pineapple pizza. I remember you telling us a few months ago that you liked that combination. Thanksgiving is a really nice time to eat delicious food with the people we love. But I love Thanksgiving because there's not quite so much stuff. There's not all of the candy and the costumes from Halloween, and there usually aren't so many presents like there are at Christmas time. The gift that we give each other is our gratitude. The holiday has kind of a complicated and goofy history, but that doesn't mean that we can't set it aside as a day to be thankful and to celebrate one another. I'm grateful for all of the people in my life, and I'm also grateful for the farmers that raised the yummy food I'll be eating. What are you thankful for, Bun Bun? Family, friends, food, and all of you kids at church. Me too. Well, have a happy Thanksgiving, Bun Bun. We'll see you next time. And now, please join me in singing our children out to Children's Chapel.
I invite you now into a time of meditation. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and reflect on these words by Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who practiced mindfulness. Let us be at peace with our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become wholly ourselves. Let us pray that we ourselves cease to be the cause of suffering to each other. With humility, with awareness of the existence of life and of the sufferings that are going on around us, let us practice the establishment of peace in our hearts and on earth. Amen.
The mental health community is a large community. However, very few of our leaders have a condition themselves. Many leaders of organizations representing people with mental illness have seen it firsthand through a friend or relative who has mental illness, but knowing someone who has mental illness and having mental illness are not the same. We only know what it's like to live with mental illness. We know our wants and our needs best. Our mental health system would be much better if we were more involved. But again, stigma has prevented us from coming forward and representing ourselves. And staying out of the important conversations only perpetuates and intensifies certain stigmas about people with mental illness. We need to speak for ourselves. We need to assume our power and pursue our goals. We welcome and value the respectful guidance and counsel of our allies, but we need to increasingly lead the way in advocating for and supporting our community. We are at our most powerful when we are standing together. I wish many things for my community that I love dearly. Sadly, our history is filled with cruel and dehumanizing treatment. Once we were cast off by society, discarded in asylums, locked up, isolated, immobilized, even lobotomized and sterilized. Now, many of our peers are in jails and in prisons or living in extreme poverty on the streets. We must not let stigma silence the cries of our community. To allow these wrongs to continue, we must advocate for each other. I wish all people with mental illness, whether we're struggling or well, will be accepted, respected, and fairly treated. It's time for individual and social change that recognizes our humanity. We are capable of recovery. We can and should and have meaningful lives. These are the words of Catherine Point, who is a mental health advocate, writer, and entrepreneur.
For fruit
morning. I'm Chauntelle Lieske. So we are with NAMI or NAMI, you can say it either way, Spokane. And so we are the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. And Scott and I are here to represent NAMI Spokane, which is your local nonprofit doing these services here within our community. NAMI Spokane, we are dedicated to empowering all those who've been affected by mental illness through advocacy, awareness, education, and support. And we do that through the services and programs that we provide to the members of our community. We are an entirely peer-led organization, so that means all of our service and education courses that we do are led by people who have been there, people living with mental health conditions or loved ones who have supported others going through mental health conditions. In the supports that we provide, we have support groups led by someone who has a mental health condition. Scott here is one of our connections facilitators and supporting others living with mental health conditions. We have family support groups, so as you're helping a loved one navigate mental health systems, we are there to support those family members. We have education. We go out into the community and we openly talk about mental health conditions. You're going to hear Scott's story today. We provide education to someone who may have just received their diagnosis about what that means and what tools they have to maintain their recovery. We provide that same education to family members so that they can help understand their loved one's diagnosis and what they can do to help support them. We've also started education with our youth, so starting that mental health conversation at a really young age on how do I talk about my mental health and who can I talk to my mental health about, and teaching those youth that they're not alone with those feelings. We also do a lot of advocacy. We do it here locally in Spokane to ensure that our systems are working for those living with mental health conditions, and we also do it at the state level to make sure that people who have mental health conditions have access to services and the support that they need. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Scott Bowmer. I wanted to let you know what a nice facility you have. One of our previous executive directors, Terry Koski, was a member here, and so we would do recognition events and volunteer meetings here because it's a nice facility, and you'd let us use the plates and the silverware. So, my name's Scott. My dad was in the Coast Guard, so I grew up around the United States, but he's originally from Tico. So this is always considered home, because both my aunts and my cousins live here, and we'd spend summers up in Tico and in Spokane. And then I was in the Navy for 6 years, and the whole time I was in the Navy, Spokane was still always my home, even though I lived out in Hawaii. And if you asked any of my shipmates where I'd live after I got out of the Navy, they'd say Spokane, because I like it so much. So I grew up in the Coast Guard. I was born in Cleveland, lived in New York City, San Francisco, and New Orleans. Then my dad retired, and I came up here and I went to high school at Central Valley. And that was a very nice experience. I was in high school with my cousins, so I knew somebody, and enjoyed all the outdoor activities. I was in Boy Scouts, and I'm sharing my upbringing with you so you can see that mental illness doesn't have any preconditions about who it affects. Because I grew up, I was considered very smart when I was little. I was in gifted programs, and I took AP classes at Central Valley, and then I went to the Naval Academy afterwards, and that was a challenging environment. One thing I noticed was each step of the ladder when I'd go up, you were less and less unique. So there was other people that were like you, which was nice. There was a lot of good connections made at the Naval Academy, friends I still have. Then I was in the Navy, like I mentioned. I was out in Pearl Harbor. And then I decided to get out of the Navy. And I went to graduate school at the University of Washington. And that's when I had my first experience with mental illness. I was feeling quite depressed during the summer between my first and second year there. And it was because I wasn't quite sure what my vocation was going to be. I had gone there thinking I was going to do finance, but I took the finance classes and I liked them, but it didn't feel like it completed me. So I started seeing a counselor at the clinic there at University of Washington. And then luckily I decided to take some manufacturing and operations analysis classes, which I hadn't initially taken because I'd had them at the Naval Academy, so there was no need to repeat them at University of Washington. But then there were some electives. I took those, and I was like, oh, I found my home. I like this. It was very exciting, and I was good at it, and so I realized my vocation wasn't finance, it was more operations. Luckily, one reason I'd gone to the University of Washington was I thought if I went to school on the East Coast, the odds of getting a job over in the Northwest were probably slim to none because Boeing tends to hire engineers from within. They don't go to the graduate education business school to hire people. So even their finance and IT people generally came from their engineering division in Boeing. But luckily, Intel called me up, and they had a facility in Portland, and they called me up to interview, and I went down there and did a great interview and really liked everyone, and I got hired. And I really felt my niche. It was a growing division. I was able to have a lot of autonomy, which I like. I like being able to do what I think's right. I don't mind accountability along with it, but I like autonomy a lot. And I was feeling very good. Then what happened was I had a relationship with a coworker there, and we became very close and almost married. And my daughter was born in Portland, and things got contentious afterwards. And so I decided to leave Intel. And I did, and it was about the same time of the Iraq-Iran war. And there was a fast track for people that were in the Navy to be in the Merchant Marine. There's commercial merchant mariners that work on ships that go up and down the coast or go overseas and back. You've seen those probably in the paper with some of these supply shortages. And then there's the military side of the Merchant Marine where we contract ships to haul military equipment during wartime. And so I did that for about 4 years. And the only thing that was hard was my daughter. Luckily I had started the Merchant Marine after she had started school, because then she had something to do. I wasn't gone when she was really little, and she wouldn't form a relationship with me, so I focused on her when she was little, and luckily that worked out well because she only asked me one time, why can't you be like a regular daddy? And I told her, I said, you know where you'd be right now if I had a regular job? And she goes, where? And I said, daycare. I said, when I'm here, the only thing I'm concentrating on is you, and we can travel or we can spend a lot of time together and do things you like. And she went, oh, she kind of nodded. And that sounded good. And I said, and when you're not with me, you're with your mommy, so you're always with somebody. So that worked out well. In the Merchant Marine, though, the one struggle was to advance, I'd have to go to school when I'd be off the ship, and that's when I wanted to spend time with my daughter. So I concentrated on my daughter, but that started to take a toll on me because I felt stuck in my job. And that's the second time I started to get depressed. And when I was on a merchant ship overseas, I started to have some suicidal ideations, and they're easy to have there because all you have to do, and people do this, I wouldn't say regularly, but it happens enough that you hear about it. They just step off the side of the ship when you're in the Northern Pacific, and that's it. And I started thinking about that or staring at the ocean, and I realized that was an unhealthy feeling. So I notified my captain about it, and the company, it was a very good service. We have medical kind of over Zoom, and they isolated me to a room, and they took me off the watch bill, and after 2 days we were in Korea, and a team of people had flown out. 2 people flew out from the East Coast to escort me to a behavioral health facility in Seattle. So I got off the ship in Korea and went to Seattle. Now, this was all kind of new to me, and I got to the facility late at night, and so I didn't know what the structure was in the daily routine, but I found out in the morning when I woke up, and I was over in Kirkland at the facility there, and to me it was very new and clean, and it was a brand new wing of the building that they had just added. And we had a group meeting, and they had a form. It asked how you were feeling that day, and they had different feelings there, so you just circle them and any goals you had that day of what you wanted to do. And people would share kind of how they were feeling that day, and they'd go around the room. And the structure felt good to me, but I had started, the one thing that had happened on the ship that kind of led me to the suicidal ideations was I was going to sleep at 10 or 11, and I'd wake up at 1 or 2, and I'd be wide awake and be like, are you kidding me? What am I supposed to do? When that would happen to me ashore, I'd just go for a walk late at night. But on the ship, there wasn't anything to do late at night. You're not supposed to go out on the deck at night because it's not safe. And so that was happening to me at the behavioral health facility, and so I'd go down, walk the hall, and then they would have brought up the refrigerator items for the next day, like chocolate milk and orange juice and yogurt. And so I'd go ahead and do the nurse's job for them, and I'd stock the refrigerator. But the nursing staff was noticing that behavior, and I didn't realize that there was something to it. And I'd meet with the psychiatrist once a day, and she said, well, we're initially, based on what you've told us you were doing on the ship, and then what we've noticed here is we think you're bipolar. And I was like, what's bipolar? I didn't know what it was. And they go, it's when you have manic episodes followed by depressive episodes. And there's bipolar A that has more extreme manic episodes. And then there's bipolar B, which is more steady, but you tend to be more depressive most of the time than having manic episodes. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was there for 10 days, and then I got out, and since I'd been on the ship just before and not been planned on where to stay, there wasn't any place. My mom was not in Spokane, she was down in Arizona, and she didn't want me to be at the house by myself, so I went and stayed with my brother in Bellingham. And I started seeing a psychiatrist and a therapist, and I was familiar with Bellingham, so I'd go for walks and bike rides, and my niece and nephew were there, and I'd go to their concerts and things like that. And but my brother, fairly quickly when I was there, lost his job, and they decided to move to Spokane. Well, the bad thing about that was they took up my mom's house, so there wasn't a place for me to stay, but I wanted to come to Spokane. So my brother looked up places I could go, and he said, well, the Union Gospel Mission looks like something that's available while you get back on your feet. And so I drove over to Spokane, and I was very nervous. I didn't know anything about the Union Gospel Mission. My dad had worked at the House of Charity downtown, so I knew what that was like. But the Union Gospel Mission seemed like it was something in between being in a group home and being at the House of Charity, just on a nightly basis. So I got to the Union Gospel Mission, and they took me in and had someone show me around, And when you're there, there's a routine where you have to do chores a couple hours a day, and then there's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then after dinner there's shower time, and then lights out. So there's some structure, and there's a lot of guys that are there that are working, and they've just had bad luck, and they got forced out of their apartments, or they're not good at saving money, or they don't have a good enough job to afford an apartment. So there's a lot of guys that are there that are working during the day. And it's more of just a hotel for them to come at night. But I wasn't working. But luckily, there's an organization called Health Care for Homeless Veterans, which is under the Veterans Program. And there's a house in Spokane that moves around occasionally, but there was a group house over by the county courthouse, and they said, we can get you there. And I said, oh, okay. That sounds, you have a little more freedom, but they have some workers there that help you get your life back on track. So I moved over there to the veterans house, and I settled in, and they had chores there too, but you had a little more freedom. But they had a secretary worker that would help you with your disability requests and some of the other services you can get when you're unemployed or destitute. And so that was very helpful. And I was lucky. I got disability the first time I applied. A lot of people, it takes 2 or 3 times to apply, and when they're initially applying, they might already be on the edge of being destitute, so that timeline doesn't work well, and so they want the disability very quick, but it takes its time. It's kind of slow, and so people will be forced into homelessness while they're waiting for their disability. And luckily mine went through the first time, and I was able to start planning on moving into an apartment. The one thing though that happened at the veterans house was I started to have a manic episode around the holidays, and I was waking up in the middle of the night, and I decorated the tree at 2 in the morning. With my food stamps, I bought a couple turkeys, and I was going to cook a second Thanksgiving dinner. Like after Thanksgiving, I was going to do it again for everybody. And I was kind of acting up, and they noticed that. And my brother noticed it also, and they said, you might need to go back to the VA hospital to be inpatient again. And so I went up there to the VA. I remember going there. The next thing I remember was I was in an ambulance in Vantage, Washington, going to Seattle. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And they said, oh, we're taking you to the behavioral health clinic you were at before. And so I went there, and I thought I had gone there the first night I was at the VA. After I was at the behavioral health clinic and then came back to Spokane, I found out I had been up at the VA for a day and a half, and I didn't have any memory of it. And that's when they diagnosed me formally and said, you're definitely bipolar, because that's a symptom of a manic episode. You black out and your brain stops forming memories, and you do not remember that time. And I was acting up when I was at the VA, and so they didn't have the resources to take care of me, so they sent me to Seattle. Well, luckily when I came back, I was on my disability, so I moved out of the Union Gospel Mission, or the Veterans House, and I found a long-term hotel downtown, because I didn't think I was ready to live on my own yet, and I wanted to kind of be around people. In a motel, there's always something kind of going on, people coming and going. Plus I was downtown, and so I could walk different places and go to different activities. So that's when I started to attend NAMI support groups, and I also went to the education class And one thing the class does, and you did it here, was we learn about meditation and mindfulness. And that's one of the major things taught in the education class. And the other thing taught in the education class is goal setting and achievement, and how to break up a big goal into smaller goals and smaller goals to get them done. So I went to these NAMI classes, and I started to feel better about myself, and then I knew I was ready to get an apartment on my own. So I went, started looking for apartments. My disability was a little too much, so I couldn't get a subsidized apartment, so I had to find an apartment that was not too expensive for my budget, but it was, I did this 4 years ago, so it was a little easier. Rent's gone up quite a bit the last few years, so it'd be harder to find that. Plus, I was in debt, and I was going to file for bankruptcy, and I wanted to find the apartment before I filed for bankruptcy because I wasn't sure how that would affect finding an apartment if you filled out your credit and you had bankrupt. So I wanted to find an apartment and then file for bankruptcy. So I found an apartment, and I started feeling better, and I realized it was time to give back. I wasn't quite ready to work, but I knew I could volunteer. And you have a little bit of flexibility when you volunteer. They kind of take your schedule and tell you if it works or not, and if it does, they're happy to have you as a volunteer. So NAMI, I took the facilitator class for the support group, and that was in Yakima because we have statewide participation. And I started to teach or facilitate the support groups, which we had monthly, and they were in person. Now they've been on Zoom. The nice thing about Zoom has been someone from Colville can call in instead of driving all the way into Sacred Heart, which they wouldn't do. We've even had someone from Florida call in. A lady from Singapore that used to live in Seattle called in. And so I started facilitating the support groups. And then I took the education class, and I started the training for it. And it took a little while. We just teach 2 classes a year, so I waited for the next class, and I was the timekeeper for it so I could see how the class was run. Then the next time we had the class, I was the co-instructor for the education class for NAMI. And then I went back and I got my training for this, In Your Own Voice, where we talk about our shared experiences. Since then, I've also volunteered for community and schools where I mentor weekly a 4th grader, 5th grader, at one of the elementary schools in the valley, and I also work up at the VA where I drive the shuttle cart from the parking lot to the hotel or to the hospital. I'm starting to feel like I'm ready for work, but it'd probably be part-time just because of some of the things I needed to concentrate on. And luckily with the volunteer, as long as you finish it up right, they know that people come and go for different reasons. So that's where I am right now. I have a good relationship with my daughter. She is in law school down in Southern California, and she's coming up here for spring break. I see her about once a year. She's married now, so she has a husband, and they're starting their life together. He's in medical school. They in the same town she's in law school at. So that's good. That was the thing I wanted to concentrate on when I was younger, was my relationship with my daughter, and luckily we got through it. Now my mom, she since has gone to some of the NAMI classes because her brother, my uncle, also had mental illness, and he was diagnosed bipolar A or borderline personality disorder, but he had symptoms when he was in his 20s after he went to Stanford, and then he was in Vietnam, and then he had symptoms, and he didn't work the last 40 years of his life. But luckily, His wife is a psychiatric nurse, so he had someone in-house that could watch him. So he got very lucky. We got lucky as a family because he'd probably be on the street if he didn't have that. So, and I had that resource when I was going through different phases of my life. I could ask my aunt different questions, and my uncle would share more of his story with me. So that's my story. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. NAMI's dear to my heart because every time I lead a support group, when I get done, I feel good because you did something. And we have people from all spectrums of life. Retired doctors who got a late in life diagnosis and had it their whole career, and they just learned to deal with it on their own. To younger people that are just coming to grips with the reality of their diagnosis and that they have to start to plan for it through their life. So we help them. They can see that other people have been successful with the illness. So thank you very much.
Well, we're going to close with a song that we have in our turquoise hymnals again. It's called When I Am Frightened. It strikes me that, there is a stigma still in our society about mental illness. And part of it disconnects people. And so one of the things this song does is it talks about sharing feelings and sharing experiences. And so I think it's really quite valuable. So please rise as you're willing and able to sing When I Am Frightened. When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you be strong for me? Sing to me quietly. Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When I am angry, will you still embrace me? When I am thoughtless, will you understand? Will you believe in me? Stand by me willingly. Will you share some of your questions with me? If you will show me acceptance, then I may learn to give as you do. Then I may learn to give. When I am troubled, will you listen to me? When I am lonely, will you be my friend? Will you be there for me? Comfort me tenderly. Will you share some of your feelings with me? If you will show me commitment, then I may learn to love as you do. Then I may learn to love.
As we depart this week to enjoy our Thanksgiving rituals, I leave you with the words of UU minister Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.
Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom,
share experiences about that. I'm familiar with it.
Right. I'm involved with homeless. I go to any meeting now, council meeting, homeless, mental illness. So trying to help them on the street. You got both of them. Yeah, so I'm throwing that out there, but I did see an article recently somewhere that diet can affect your drink soda. That's a recipe.
That's the one thing I have to cut is the soda.
Yeah, so you drink a lot of soda pop?
Because I don't drink coffee.
Right.
For my caffeine.
Yes. Well,
I never learned to drink coffee. I wish I would have because it's probably better. Yeah.
it probably would be. But yeah, let me see. I know there's other ways to get caffeine. I bet you get caffeine pills like that. The soda pop is really so much sugar and I drink that. When I quit the meat, I thought, oh, I'll just have a soda pop today. You know, because I want to have something that's fine. Oh my God.
You can get caffeinated tea and then you're not getting the sugar.
That's right, like green tea.
Yeah.
Or just black tea.
Not black tea.
So anyway, you know, it is just horrible how society scapegoats. And then so what do we got? Oh, okay. You know, like this country, maybe the guy, sounds like a big one. But to do that, you gotta have these.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I like the
I have a sister.
Okay. See you. Good seeing you.
She's in her apartment going crazy, but nobody can help her because she refuses any help. Now, I guess until she is dead, or lights out on fire, or steps out in the street with a gun or something naked, nobody's going to do anything. You can't get detained by the NHS now unless you're just so out there. Is that true?
No, it is. Yeah, unless you're really out.
You got to be just so addicted to yourself.
I'm lucky that I get to use the game. So,
Yeah.
because I get my counseling up there and all that.
I have a friend who's a dentist, he's a janitor, but he's a non-vet. I try to take self-destruction. But Yeah, I mean the PTSD just from my friends. PTSD, my parents were too. They had PTSD. They were this thing.
Sure.
Okay, sure, Scott. Let me give you a card. Just you guys ever doing something? I'm a DJ. And I go. Oh wow. But this name is support. But I understand since I was a kid, my dad and my girlfriend. They gave me Remeron. Do you know that one? Remeron. Okay. How about Depakote? Bipolar. Depakote.
No, they had me. I'm not sure. Resperdal.
Oh yeah, Resperdal. Right. Resperdal.
And that was the one that kind of I thought I was in a fog.
Oh yeah, that's what Depakote does, and the Remeron makes you in fog.
So now they're on lithium.
Yeah, so you're on lithium. I used to take that for a while. Does that help it?
Yeah, it helps. It stabilizes the mood swings. I have